What's up, everyone? Thank you so much for joining us for today's podcast. We have a guest on our show today who is going to really give us a lot of good insight about building your vendor list and about being on vendor lists. She is a planner out of Boston. She knows so much about this topic, and we are really, really grateful to have her on our show. Renee Sabo, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I am well. And you are a fellow podcaster as well, correct?
I am. Yes. I have a podcast called The Confetti Hour. It's for fellow wedding pros. So I have to get you on there.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to be on there. And I love learning about new podcasts in this industry. I know when I first started this podcast, we're kind of searching around, what information's out there, what learning material. So it's really cool that you do that.
Yeah, same. Likewise. It's a cool space. I'm really grateful for it. It's evolved, I'm sure, like yours, into more than I expected. And the community is awesome with podcasts and all the guests that you get to bring on. So I really enjoy it. I think it's a safe space for us all to say the things that we are thinking.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. It's also a great time filler because I know a lot of us, we're multitasking between family or maybe even other jobs, other careers. If we do this part-time or if we're doing this full-time, you're commuting to a venue or whatever, and being able to throw on a 20-minute, 30-minute, hour-long podcast, whatever it is, and learn something along the way really has made a difference in my life. I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's actually how I started a podcast because I'm always in the car driving 3 or 4 hours back and forth to meetings. And I just kept wishing there was more wedding related podcasts. And so that's kind of why it stemmed out of wanting to not only, network and build the community, but also just having a resource. Like I listen to my guest interviews while I'm driving, and it's a digestible amount of education while you're on the go, which is nice. And for entrepreneurs or business, like any wedding creatives, we never really turn it off. So I like constantly hearing new things while I'm on the go.
Seriously. Well, you kind of have to, as entrepreneurs, we're kind of these unicorns, maybe even among our friends a lot of times, where you really need to keep the positive input going because there are days that you definitely feel down and discouraged. And obviously with everything with COVID and the pandemic, it's like, we need that encouragement for sure.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
So Renee, you are highly qualified to talk about this vendor list topic. And we're going to talk about that, but it's going to have a specific bent and talk about planners. You are a planner yourself, right? Your company is Urban Soiree.
Yep, that's correct. And I am a full service planner. I'm based here out of Boston, but I service the East Coast and destinations. So kind of unique situation when it comes to vendor lists. But previously, I actually worked for venues as well. So I think hopefully I'll give some good insight on both my intel on both sides.
Very cool. Well, let's jump right in. Let's talk about venues building their vendor lists. Personally, I know, so we had a staffing company before that we owned for about 6 years. It was just acquired. And now, so in that sense, when we were that vendor, we were absolutely looking to be on vendor lists. And then now we manage and operate wedding venues. So we just jumped to the other side.
That's so crazy. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Being on different sides of it.
It's super interesting. What advice do you have just right out of the gate for anyone new in the industry? What advice do you have for people? Because everyone, like the first thing you start hearing is, the vendor list, the vendor list, the vendor list. That's so important. What's your kind of gut first take advice for someone?
I think right out of the starting gate, I would want to say that every vendor list should be personalized, both on the venue end of things and the vendors. So I hear a lot of vendors say, I want to be on, these vendor lists. And while I think that is really great, I think it's important for us to also make sure that we're the right fit on either side, right? And for the most part, that happens naturally. I do think a lot of people get put on vendor lists because they work in that space and, it's a nice, fit. But the thing that we have to remember is that businesses evolve over time. I mean, personally, with my business, the services that I offered 4 years ago look different. And I'm still on vendor lists where I don't maybe fit as well anymore. And there may be someone more qualified or a better fit for them. So I think out of starting gate, I would just say that no vendor list is the same. And that's a good thing, actually, because the whole point of a vendor list is to narrow down our couples search, right? And put people in touch that are going to be the right fit, both from a venue standpoint, who's going to work well in the space, who is going to treat their clients with the same care that they want, couples to be treated, but also like just what is a good fit for the couple. You don't want to send them a list of 40 people and then they keep striking out. That's not a very good experience for their planning process, So that gave you like 10 things in one, but all on my mind. I'm very excited to talk about this topic.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's speak to venues first. So I think, you said it's very personalized for a new vendor who's coming in. And I know that I asked that question kind of from the vendor perspective, but switching it on the other side of the aisle here, right?
Very nice.
But I am a dad after all, right?
That's amazing. Fun.
But switching to the other side of things, from a vendor perspective, or from a venue perspective, what should venues be looking for in their vendors, assuming they have no vendor list already established?
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, someone who understands your property and the requirements that come with working at your property. And while it is great to put people who can grow into that, it's also important for you as a venue to be able to take the stress off of your team and feel like your vendors can be trusted, right? So a good example I can give is I used to work for the New England Aquarium here in Boston, which was a really unique space. They have a gorgeous tent on the harbor front out back, but it comes with this level of requirements because there are live animals, right? And it's difficult from a venue perspective to put someone on a list that hasn't experienced the setup requirements there. It's open to the public until 6 or 7 p.m., which means you have to be ready to set up between 6 and 7 or 7 and 8. There's decibel requirements for DJs and bands. They can't go over a certain decibel for the animals and their eardrums. I think animals have eardrums. That's a funny thing I never thought about. But anyways, and also the different requirements like at the property, right? Can we hang things? What can actually be done? What are the load-in times? I think the beauty of a vendor list for a venue is that you get to curate people who are going to make your lives easier and also treat your venue with care, which is really important if you are doing a large volume of weddings, or even if you aren't doing a large volume of weddings. You don't want someone that's going to not work well with the property and what comes with working at the property, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Another question kind of clarifying there's this talk of your ideal client, right? I think in the wedding industry, we talk quite a bit on, your ideal client avatar or your client, like who is your ideal client? And so we talk about that a lot. How do you, as a brand new venue who may not totally understand what that is yet, what's your starting place? Like, where is zero for you to build from when you really haven't clarified, like, are you more of a budget bride offering? Are you going like ultra luxury or anything in between?
Right. I definitely think that understanding the characteristics of what couples look like in the different markets that are in your area. So I was saying I work in many different destinations and cities, and it looks different in every town, honestly, even towns. Like I live in Boston and it looks different in the different areas. And I think if you're opening a new venue or you are a new venue, it's good to look at your competition in a healthy way, just kind of see what fits well in that area and who these people are that are likely booking their weddings there. As much as you may want to be, say, a super high-end, venue where you're only hosting one wedding at a higher rate for the whole weekend, as opposed to 3 weddings at lower rates, that may not be an opportunity in your town or your area. Like maybe couples don't go to that area for that reason. So it might help you a little bit figure out kind of what that model looks like. And then from a very business standpoint, I think having like some sort of business coach or industry mentor that deals with like consulting work, launching properties and venues is always a good idea. I mean, I'm sure it would save you hours of your time trying to figure this out. I personally have it for my business, and I've been able to grow a lot smoother, you're always going to be finding the road bumps, right? But I do think that a consultant at some point, or hiring a fellow venue, like who may, like maybe there's a mentor that might be able to also, I guess, tell you how they got started and got to the market that you're aiming for. I think it's just helpful. It's so cool how much resources and fellow community education we have these days. So I would say lean into that, you know?
Yeah, that's absolutely something that I've heard several times with wedding pros that have been in the industry way longer than I have. Just like yourself, right? I've been in the industry for about 7 years, and I've heard from people who have been in the industry 15 plus years that, there wasn't all of this information. Like now there are so many Facebook groups and, Instagram, and like there's actually a lot of really good coaching.
Yes.
Right now, which is incredible.
It's so, I mean, it's getting so specific, which is awesome too. Like for me, I have very specific wedding planning mentors in the industry, and it may look different than my colleague who maybe we are working in the same venues, but we're all different. And I would say every venue is different in the respect that you have different processes, you have different things that are going to draw your clients to you. And it's really special to be able to have some sort of education or have access to that so that you kind of feel like assured that you're doing the right things and you're making the right, decisions on the growth of your business. Because man, these wedding seasons come fast. Like sometimes you don't even have time to think in the middle of it. You're like, oh, we're already like 30 weddings in, right? If you're a venue. Back when I worked at a venue, that was more common. As a planner, that would not be doable in my realm. But yeah, so I think that taking the down season to really look at that, or if you are newer, this is the time for sure to really figure out, positioning yourself, like where do you want to be in the marketplace? And, I can give one good example too. I actually have a friend who owns a new venue up in New Hampshire. It's gorgeous property. And it's a hard area for her. There's not a lot of hotels. There's not a lot of other high-end venues, but she really wants to target the client that wants to do high-end events there, which means when you get into high-end events, you can't do set up as easily on the same day and load out. We do it. Is it fun? No. If you're really getting into installations and bringing in lighting and tents and things like that, these things take multiple days for setup. And that's something that she really was excited to incorporate in her venue. There's not anything like it. But she had to find the balance with it because it is in the middle of nowhere. In New Hampshire, most venues there are volume-based properties. So they would do Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and you're not typically getting those huge installs the way you would like, in different areas near us. So for her, she has people coaching her and figuring out kind of where it's going to fall, what's realistic and what just isn't realistic at all, right? Because at the end of the day, she also needs to make money and be a venue. So it's kind of been cool to watch her with that journey, and she's definitely finding her niche with it all. So
totally.
Yeah.
I was asking that question about the vendor list and just like new venues, because I know when we first managed, one of the first properties that we managed, we put folks on the list that we liked and that we had already had experience with coming from the industry.
Yeah.
And I think probably half the list was wrong.
Yeah. Oh, and that's kind of what I said out of the starting gate. What I would want people to know, right, is that sometimes these are super personalized lists for a reason, because sometimes it doesn't work. And I say, so for me, I only offer full service planning, and I'm very involved with my clients about 10 months to 15 months out. And it would be pretty rare that I would get hired at like 6 or 3 months out or be a day of coordinator or any of those things. It's just not my business model. But I constantly get referrals from venues for day of coordination. I mean, literally like 20 a week. And it's my responsibility to make those partnerships and let them know I don't offer those services, because I don't want their clients to get agitated that like they're sending us to these people that don't even fit what we need. Right. And so that's kind of the thing with vendor lists, is that I always see that there's always this big list of people. And I'm like, wow, these are great people. I don't think they do what I need them to do in that space. I see this a lot with lighting. There's different types of lighting providers. Some heavily can help you with like AV and any type of production. And they'll just be like a blanket list of people. And then I get people that want like decorative lighting, like draping, and there's no recommendations for that. So we've already gone through like 4 people on their list that are not the right fit. And then I have to get approval to bring in someone to do the lighting that they actually want. And so I think being a little more intentional when when venues are putting together these lists, and, if you're getting the questions a lot with your couples, can I bring in draping? Put a draping person that you like on that vendor list and save all of us, a headache, because it is frustrating to have to keep getting approval and try to figure that all out,
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing that I should have mentioned earlier when we were talking about from a venue's perspective, a perk is if you require things like a certificate of insurance to work on your properties, all of your vendors on your vendor list should have COIs. Like, you should already have their insurance on file for the whole year, is kind of how I look at that. So, serve yourself, but also serve your clients.
Totally. So from the venue perspective, I think we're getting a clear picture. You need to be intentional about your vendor list, and you need to make sure that the vendor list that you're curating and you're being intentional about actually fits the needs of the ideal client, right? That you're that you're attracting. That's correct.
Yeah, that's totally correct. And I think there's obviously gray areas, and that ideal client, I know that we do that in air quotes for a reason, because I don't think that there's like this one person on a shelf that's always going to be our couple. But I think you could narrow it down for the most part to at least like a few types of weddings that you would do, right? Mm-hmm. With venues, it's so versatile. So having designers or planners on there that service all types of weddings, or, all looks or all styles, I think that's important. So there's a little bit of something for any type of couple you would book, right? So
let's get into a topic that I know is controversial.
Ooh.
What about charging? What's your opinion on charging to be on a vendor list? Because I know that there are so many different ways. And then I'm going to throw you kind of a curveball after you answer this question, because I'm curious to see kind of it's something new that we've been doing, and I don't know if it's a disaster or if it's great. So I want to hear your opinion live like this, but What do you think?
That's a good question. I struggle with this too. It is a controversial question. I mean, my initial gut says that I don't think it's ideal. Mm-hmm. That being said, I definitely deal with that where I'm located, and it's sometimes they do it in a different route. Where I've seen it done nicely is where they give, say, like a pamphlet out to their couples that are booked, and you're paying for advertising. So instead of paying to be like on this list, you're essentially paying to be in the bubble, right? In the promotional bubble that the venue gives to your couples. I think that's like a really nice way to do something like that. But I definitely understand why it is a thing. I mean, as a planner, when I'm referred, I don't take that lightly. It means a lot to me. And so if I had to pay to be on someone's list, I could definitely understand. It would just, I get solicited probably like every week for things like this. And it's hard from a small business perspective to have to pay for something like that, considering the amount of legwork that I do for them and the amount of, I feel it should be a mutually beneficial like relationship, I guess is my point. So controversial. I can see all sides. I guess I'm kind of like a Switzerland with a lot of matters, but I would personally probably not invest in being on a vendor list, because for me, for my business, it doesn't work, but for someone else, it might. So it may fall into the category of what kind of venue and what kind of market are you in, right?
Totally. Yeah, I've seen it I definitely see it from both sides as well. But it's interesting coming from a venue perspective, you're thinking, okay, I'm driving a lot of business
right
to this vendor. I know DJs that we have on our list that are excited to work with us. And they're like, oh my goodness, we work at these other venues that it costs us like $1,200 a year. To be on the list. And sure, they say they're willing to pay it because they get the business from it, but you're totally right about it being mutual. The other thing though, with venues is you're looking for the most ways that you can make money. Right?
I can see it all sides. It's so hard.
And it's really tough. On the vendor side, of course, you have, someone who wants the business, but you're right. It does kind of put them in a weird scenario. So the curveball that I was going to throw at you is we actually do something where we incentivize the couple to book our vendors on our list. So we don't charge the vendor to be on our list, but we will offer a $500 discount if they use a certain number of vendors from all across the categories.
It's helping you guys out, right? As a venue. I love that idea, actually.
We are experimenting with it because I kind of like coming from the vendor, like being a vendor before, I remember how tough it was to get on those lists and how, like you mentioned, completely uninterested I was as a small business to pay $1,200 a year
per venue. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, oh my gosh. The other thing that I've seen venues do that's interesting is actually have events that they expect their vendor list to take care of complimentary.
Yes, I have absolutely seen that. We used to do that at the properties that I worked for. And I actually think that that's a nice exchange, right? You're giving the vendor the opportunity to showcase their services at this event. And in hand, they're doing that for you as well, inviting your couples to like an open house where they can experience your side of things, which could be the food and beverage or the venue or just getting new couples in the door, right? Mm-hmm. So kind of a win-win for sales exchange, I guess.
Totally.
Most vendors are more inclined to, I think, provide like their services pro bono than pay a flat fee to be on a list, you know?
Totally. Because then they can work in their profit margin. Their profit margin goes away. Their costs are likely less. So there is an expense there, but it's definitely manageable versus forking over cash.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that successful at several venues here. And, you know, it's so tough because I also think some of these vendor lists can be so strict, right? So say you have 4 photographers, it is really hard for anyone outside of those 4 photographers to get on your property. And so like, where's the balance? Like now I'm flipping it on you. I want to question you. Where's the balance? Like, because I think the more vendors that love your property mean the more people that could potentially refer your property. But if you're only referring 4 people every year, like 2 photographers, other people don't have the opportunity to work in your space. So I feel like there has to be this balance, like of making new relationships, but maintaining the ones that are long standing, you know, It's so difficult.
We work with a number of different venues, or we worked with them in the past, where they would have the lists. It would be an open vendor list. So, or an open vendor policy. So they would just be a blank canvas venue. Then you could bring in any vendor you wanted as long as they were a professional. Mm-hmm. And this is actually how we operate most of our venues. But then there is a list. So basically the list maybe isn't as impactful as those closed venues where you're only using people from the list.
Yeah.
But at the same time, since we're incentivizing the couples to use the vendors, and because we're also allowing it to be open, you're right. Like we do want the exposure. And I can see from any venue owner who's listening to this right now, venue manager, like you want the exposure for new up and coming vendors.
And you also want your clients to not feel like they're being put in a box. I mean, there's a fine balance between making all of our lives easier and referring the same people. And there's also just plain right, like telling them what they have to do for their wedding. And every couple wants their wedding to truly reflect them. And so it's physically impossible for everyone to fit one size fits all, right? So I love that kind of like, here's the preferred vendor list. We highly incentivize you to book with these people because they're awesome. I'm sure a lot of them can work with couples of all different styles that they're looking for, you know, like romantic, boho, all the things, right? But also allowing them, if they did want to bring in someone, they have that option. I think a big one I see a lot would be photography, because there's so many photographers out there and there's so many types of photographers that people get really overwhelmed. Like it's kind of a turnoff for my couples when they're looking for a venue if they have an exclusive list of photographers or an exclusive list of videographers, and they don't care as much about like rentals and lighting. They're like, oh, clearly if the venue says it's exclusive, they're the best to use or something like that, you know? But when it comes to these like very specific stylized areas, it gets tough, like floral, photo, video, stuff like that.
Totally. Oh yeah. Photo and video are huge, you know, just from the presets that a photographer is going to use in their editing, like how their images appear, if it's more dark and moody versus, yeah, absolutely. I see that.
I mean, I have worked at properties where we had to pick off the exclusive list. We tried to pick someone who was the best fit off of the options. And my clients were not happy every time I have to do that. And it's because they didn't get the opportunity to, they were told who to work with, right? They didn't have the opportunity to create a personal relationship with someone. Sure, they didn't mind them, but I think like there's just some areas that are going to have to be, kind of looser, right? So
Totally.
yeah.
This, what we're talking about definitely flies in the face, I think, of a lot of kind of established wedding etiquette that's been established for a long time, and not etiquette. I shouldn't say etiquette, but like venue kind of mindset. When you think about like a hotel, or you think about, I'm not sure if you guys have like in the Boston area, but any sort of corporations that manage multiple venues.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. They like a blanket of the vendor list has to cover all the properties, right?
Exactly. So do you see that actually being very restrictive for couples, or because obviously you get it from the venue perspective, I assume, right? Like what they're trying to accomplish is to get as many weddings in the year as possible, so that they're like, there's the finance part, right?
Always there's it, and if there isn't the finance part, you're doing business wrong. Like there has to be the finance part of a business. So I do see that, but I see it kind of what we were just talking about when I get properties like that are over like a corporation that covers, say, a lot of the newer properties. They'll have like an umbrella that's like owned by a certain corporation, and I say they do a lot of work on their vendor lists because they're to leave some flexibility, but then and have some exclusive people that, again, the lighting example is one, because they need to trust the people touching the building, but they may have a little more flexibility with, hair and makeup artists or, entertainers and stuff like that. So I think that I definitely see them utilizing their list in order to make their job seamless, because these buildings are, some properties are just millions and millions of dollars, and you can't just have like everyone, a different vendor every weekend coming in. I mean, it would just be so hard to manage that. It would be so much chaos, right? So I definitely see people leaning into a mix of vendor list, right? Like there's some exclusive components, and then there's some like highly suggested people. Obviously you can bring in your own if you want. And for the most part, it serves them well if they are able to offer those highly suggested peoples have a little bit of a variety, right? So
totally. Would you, if someone's listening to this right now, they maybe work at a venue or they own a venue and they are considering locking certain categories, what categories would you suggest? You kind of briefly mentioned a couple, but what categories are like the biggies in your mind?
I think that anything that has to do with like intense production is really helpful. So rental companies, I would say having like your top few that are strongly suggested is really helpful. I already mentioned lighting and production, and I do think that that's really helpful. So that would be, if say you have a tented property that is all year round, you don't change the tent, you still probably want the same provider, because if you have different people coming in and out, or maybe you have the same two, I think you'd want to lock it at some point, because if you had like 10, it could get crazy coordinating those people, right? And then some other ones that I see often are like bakers, like the cake, because they're doing so many deliveries, and it just depends on your property, I would say. But sometimes finding a couple cake providers is nice, and you can streamline the process for your clients with planning, because you say, we work exclusively with these two bakers. They're highly sought after, have amazing cakes. Go try one or two. Which one do you want? They have a pre-package that makes it easy for their couples, right? So that's another one too. And other than that, I don't see other areas that would work as well to be locked in, right? Because everything else is super personal. Like your florist, there's hundreds of different types of florists. So I do think it's nice if you want to lock in that category to have, say 4 or 5, like a variety. Actually, one big one I forgot would be catering and bar, like beverage services, I see that locked in a lot. And I honestly appreciate it as a planner sometimes, as long as they're quality and they match the representation of like my couple that wants to be there. But it's a huge help not to have to go back and forth between 15 catering. Sometimes when you get people too many options, they're like, whoa, what do we do? So knowing that a caterer has worked in your space, they can provide the experience that your couples are like know to love your venue. I think that that could be a good area to lock in 1, 2, or 3 different caterers.
To incentivize that, because I've seen that as well, but to incentivize that, do you like, maybe this is something you've seen before, charging any outside people who are not on the list to come and work there just to kind of add an additional layer of friction?
Yes, I actually see a few properties here. I see this a lot with like preservation societies. So like historic properties or properties that are owned by the state, they do this a lot. You can bring in your own caterer, but it's $1,000 more. And I think it's a great idea because it still gives people the option. But the way to explain it is that if you're bringing in someone new, it is more work for every vendor involved. And that's totally fine. We welcome it with open arms because we like collaborating. But essentially, this additional fee to bring in an outside vendor is covering the time that it will take for their team to build that relationship and make sure that that vendor can be a success, set up and be successful at their venue. So I think that it's actually a great incentive and it works for people. Usually you get people that want to bring stuff in because they are looking for something custom or they are looking for a certain, thing they're not finding off of the list. And so they have the option to do it. And most of the times those are the people that are happy to pay a little extra to get what they want,
Totally.
I love that actually.
Totally. I've seen that where people are looking to kind of do something custom, but then I've also seen people trying to bring someone in because they're cheaper or they are like, they went to college with someone who now runs a catering company. And maybe it's a legit catering company.
Fine. Yeah, I would say there has to be parameters around anyone that's coming into any venue, and that's normal. It's funny. I get these questions sometimes from my couples, and they'll say, like, "Why can't I have this person?" Or like, I want to bring in a cake baker because my sister owns a bakery. That's definitely not an option. But as a venue and the caterer, everyone has a liability to A, no one get food poisoning, and B, to make sure that this is all going to go fine. So I think as the venue has parameters on, yes, you can do it. We need licensing, we need COIs, then I think just explaining that from the very start. A mistake I see often with venues that allow people that are kind of in that scenario is they don't set those guidelines at the beginning. And then the couple is getting into added fees and I think clients are much more moldable than we think. I think they're happy to follow the rules, but if they aren't told the rules from the start, it feels a little like to be added fees and figuring this all out like 3 months before their wedding. It's kind of like, why didn't you tell us that already? So
Totally.
I actually think it's important to have requirements coming into your venue, or else you are going to get like people that aren't a business, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Totally. Yeah. We kind of, we learned some of those lessons the hard way, but fortunately
I too. Honestly, I have allowed people to let their cousins bake the cake and let these things happen. And it's just from years of learning. I don't think we can ever promise anyone you're not going to have to do some pitfalls and learn.
Totally.
But also you could make it a little easier, right? For yourself.
Absolutely. Let's jump on the other side of things. Let's talk to vendors, people who want to work at a venue, people who are, maybe they've had their eye, there's this incredible venue in their town and they've really wanted to be added onto that list or at least develop a relationship. What are some things that right away they can start doing? And let's say they even know like the type of service that I provide is perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe they see 4 vendors already on that list that are like kind of, competing, but there's something different that they do that they know that couples at this venue would love. What are some best practices for doing that?
Yeah, I love this question because I think we're all aspiring to work in a new venue or work with new partners. And I mean, that's why I love my job is that I get to experience new opportunities, right? And it can be hard though. So I think like there's a couple things with this. I would say relationships take time to build, and to be understanding of that and not give up, I would say. And then I would also, I would work hard at networking with the venues, making sure they understand that you're a good fit for their clientele and their services, and possibly doing, like, sometimes they have those open house events. Maybe you can offer to do one pro bono so that they can see you in action and see what you're talking about. Look, I am a great fit, The other flip side would be get to know your competitors. Like, find out who those 4 people are on that list and shadow them, or maybe just say, hey, if you're booked, or all these people are booked, I'd love to be considered. And it has to be first and foremost from the catering or sales manager at the venue. I do think that, like, these relationships are important to them. But if they say, oh, sure, we can't put you formally on the list, but if all 4 of our normal people are booked, we would not mind if they send your name. Like, I think it's just all about networking and slowly building that foundation. And, for me, a lot of the venues that I wanted to get into, I had worked at because younger in my career, I had done events there. And I think that people really underestimate shadowing or, getting their foot in the door that way. Like, you got to do the hard work and they'll see it. You just keep building time and time again. So
what about asking? Because you've kind of mentioned the approach just now, but what about asking to be on the list? Or what about, like, how do you approach that conversation? Because I know I've had plenty of times where a vendor just walks straight up and is like, hey,
I want to be on your list.
I want to be on the list.
I don't know if you'll like my answer, Jonathan, but I hate people that do this. They do it to me all the time as planners. They're like, we want to work with you. I'm like, cool. Do you even know what I do? Do you even know what I need as a planner? As a venue, like, do you even know what they look for in their couples? And again, that goes back to really knowing your business and what you offer and where you serve and that ideal client, right? But I would say be a little more tactful about it. Like, we, as venues, they get hundreds of emails a week, and they're getting bombarded all the time with people that want to work there. And I think that you should be a little more intentional and strategic than just shooting off, like, prospecting emails or doing things like that. For instance, if the venue hosts networking evenings, make it a point to go to those. Like, if you see they're partnering with a local magazine that's doing an event at the hotel you want to work with, go to those events, show your face, show your support. If you can refer clients, it's kind of tough, right? Venues and planners are the top of the food chain when it comes to referrals. And so that's why we get solicited the most. But for me, I look at people that want to build an actual relationship that understands my needs as a planner or what my clients' needs are, right? And also that, like, I don't know, that they have done any research at all about what the services are that we offer. So I think that I hate people that solicit out of nowhere. I think building partnerships take time, but that they're more effective,
Totally. I love that. I love that answer. Honestly, I didn't hate that answer at all.
I wasn't sure. I was like, hopefully you won't dislike that I say I hate people that do that, but I do, because I think that, the nature of our jobs is that we do book in advance. So, like, most of my clients right now, we're recording I've aged 50 years, Jonathan. So in the pandemic. So what is it? May 2021. Yeah, right. Yeah. We all have. So May 2021, I'm already fully booked for 2022. And I'm often getting solicited. I just got a few today, videographers and photographers saying they would love to work with me for 2022. I'm already booked. I've already booked my vendor team. So now we'd be looking to work together in 2023. And that looks different, right? Not every planner is like me, but again, I'm very full service. So that's what my booking cycle looks like. I think it could do people well to network and start to understand what their booking cycles are like, because for a venue, I'm probably looking to build partnerships that would refer me for 2023 right now. So I may not want to invest in, say, a marketing brochure or an open house for this year because it doesn't serve my business. Now, I'm a very unique situation because full service planners book like way in advance, but I would say most people are like a year out. So, anywhere from 6 months to a year out, that's their booking cycle. And that takes time is really the point I was making, is that you can't just expect to send someone a prospect email and get a referral tomorrow, because the booking cycle isn't like that in the wedding industry. They need to get to know you, get to know your services. And then they also need, their booking clients it's a big cycle, right? So
Totally. Well, and it's weird. The pandemic, like, slowed things down a lot, but then it also sped things up because some people who had been waiting for so long now all of a sudden readjusted and planned a wedding that they had planned somewhere. They had to rebook somewhere else and plan their wedding that they had spent 12 months on. Now they did it in 3 months.
it's like the love-hate relationship with the industry in general is, I think, always been kind of like that. I always get clients that are super far out, and then I get some clients that are like, "Oh, we realized we want ceremony musicians," and I'm like, "It's 3 months from the wedding. Now you want a string quartet?" So it is funny how we're always constantly like, "Stop, go, stop, go, stop, go," which is, you have to like that lifestyle in order to be in this industry, I think.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
I want to ask one more question about this. What other creative ways do you think that wedding pros could make other people in their field who they wanted to develop, referral networks off of? What are other creative ways that they can kind of get the word out? Because I see all too often the traditional, I'm just going to take this one, right off the discussion, but like the brochures, right? Or the business cards. Someone comes in and drops a stack of business cards or brochures off, and it's like, no one's going to touch your brochure.
No, I think that people sorely underestimate networking associations and networking events. And, I'm biased. I'm the president of our ILEA Boston chapter here, but I just see that it is successful for people because it's a very lighthearted, no strings attached way to get to know each other. And so we have venue providers that will sponsor events when it fits in their marketing budget. And I've never heard a venue say that wasn't, worth it. Now, I will say that you have to make sure that the association fits your ideal people that you want to network with. But I think that's a really great way to build partnerships, both on the venue and the vendor side, even just being a member and going to monthly meetings. I see a lot of venues who network with each other at these association groups, and they give each other referrals to each other, which is amazing to see. I mean, when I worked at the aquarium, we were booked out a year in advance as well, unless someone wanted a Friday or Sunday, or another day of the week. And so we would refer the Museum of Science, which is like down the road, and it's a similar vibe. Do you know what I mean? So
totally.
But until you really get the face-to-face and you're like, oh, I know Renee at this place, they're not going to think to refer. So even though you may have like not an immediate return on investment with these things, it does add up over time. Like, I primarily don't spend a lot of money on marketing. It's all referral based because of the partnerships I've been able to kind of create. And so with planners, it's the same thing, or vendors, it actually is good to know who your competition is and to be friends with them, because we all can only take on a select amount of people. So.
Totally. And I think that's the unique thing about the wedding and events industry is our competition is limited. Depending on who you are. I mean, a venue only has so many good dates.
Right.
Right. And so once you're done with there's 52 Saturdays, there's like 150, weekends, but the problem is plus whatever. But then the problem is, depending on where you live, there's seasonal things there.
In Boston, we're very seasonal. I mean, you just explained exactly why I'm already booked for 2022, because at the end of the day, there's really only a handful of weekends that I could have been booked for. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, I don't book every weekend. So a lot of your providers, unless they are large enough where they do want to work every weekend, you may not be able to have one photographer on your vendor list because they probably don't want to work 52 weekends in a row. That sounds like a horrible work-life balance, Yeah. So you want good people, and we all can lift each other up, and you would want the people that are unavailable to refer people that you also like, right? So
totally.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this was really fun, Renee. I feel like we delved in so much. We talked about so much, both for venues and vendors. And I know people are going to love this. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation too. I feel like it's making my wheels turn, because I'm like, oh, I think I need to start building more partnerships. So I appreciate this too.
Yeah, absolutely. Where can people find you? Obviously, we talked about the podcast in the beginning, but where can people go check that out and then check your services out as well?
Yeah, thank you so much. You can find me over on Instagram, obviously very active there. It's at urban_soiree and then at the confetti hour for the podcast. You can find the confetti hour on anywhere you tune into podcasts, Apple or iTunes, Spotify. And then my website is urban-soiree.com. So yeah.
Very cool.
For having me.
Of course. My pleasure. Everyone should just go over. Well, of course, you have to check out the video because then you'll get to see Renee's smiling face. But and that's on YouTube. But you just grab your phone, go over to her Instagram, and just DM her. Hey, I want to be on your list. I want referrals.
Don't do that to me, Jonathan. I thought we were friends now. I'm just
all kidding. All kidding. Well, thank you so much, Renee. This was fun.
Yes, thank you too.
All right. Bye-bye.